This is the Colorado River. And this one too is the Colorado River. Nope, I didn't mix anything up. Rivers are supposed to have water. That's kind of their whole thing. But with the Colorado, well, it's a bit of a different story. Dry landscapes are all that's left of where the river should have been flowing into the Gulf. As for the water, well, it ended up somewhere else entirely. Let me grab a cup of coffee and let's figure this out. Just an unobtrusive reminder to do something under the video if you usually do it. If not, no worries. And thanks to those who get why I prefer to stay anonymous. The Colorado River is one of the main rivers in the southwestern U.S. and northern Mexico. It's 1,450 miles long, making it the fifth longest in the U.S. and allowing it to flow through as many as 5 states. All these states rely on the Colorado for water, hydroelectric power, and recreation. It's also home to fish and wildlife. In short, everyone needs it. Colorado starts in the Never Summer Mountains in Rocky Mountain National Park at an elevation of 10,180 feet above sea level. Winter snow falls on the towering peaks of the Rockies, piling up in deep drifts until the spring thaw melts the snowpack, steadily releasing hundreds of thousands of gallons of fresh water. That's how the Colorado River is born. Then, as it flows southwest, the river gradually gains strength from countless small and larger tributaries. In the end, most of its upper course is a fast-moving stream. But the farther it gets from the source, the calmer the Colorado becomes. It winds through the iconic canyons of the American West until finally it reaches the Gulf of California. At least that's how it had been for thousands of years, but now everything has changed. So the river's supposed to reach the Gulf of California in Mexico. But here's the catch. It just doesn't. For years now, the Colorado River has been ending near the Gulf, turning into a tiny trickle just a few miles from the shore. There's just not enough water left for it to finish its journey properly. When I first heard about it, I was surprised because the situation kind of goes against the whole idea of rivers. Flowing into something. That's what rivers do. They start from a high point, make their way across the land, and then end up in another body of water. Whether it's a lake, the sea, or the ocean, that's just how our planet works. And this isn't just some random coincidence you can brush off. Water flows down from the mountains into the ocean, which pumps it back up through the clouds. You know, the water cycle and all that. It's a closed loop, a system where one thing leads to another. But in the case of the Colorado River, a key link just vanished, and the chain broke. And it's been like that since the early 1900s. The water just went down, and it's easy to tell by a phenomenon called bathtub rings. When the water level drops, it leaves mineral deposits on the rocks. So from photos and videos, you can see where the water level used to be, where it's supposed to be. And right away, it's clear that the Colorado River has some serious problems. When you turn on the tap in parts of Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, or California, there's a good chance that water from the Colorado River is flowing. Basically, it provides fresh water to 1 in every 10 Americans. That's a pretty big deal. Meanwhile, the average annual flow of the Colorado River is dropped by 19% compared to the 20th century average and continues to decline. Predictions say that by 2100, the flow could fall by 55%. All of this points to the fact that the Colorado River and the people it supports are facing a real disaster. The shortage threatens the freshwater supply for about 40 million people and the country's food security. That's because water from the Colorado River is used to grow 90% of the U.S. winter vegetables. Additionally, the Colorado River Basin supports an economy worth $1.4 trillion. If it were a separate country, it'd be the 7th largest in the world by economic output. But what happened? Who killed the river? Actually, we have a whole list of suspects, but we still need to gather the evidence. To meet the growing water needs across the Colorado River Basin, Congress authorized the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to build a series of dams, reservoirs, and canals to store and move water within and outside the basin. There are 15 dams on the Colorado River, including the largest dam in the U.S., the Hoover Dam in Arizona, built in 1935. This dam created Lake Mead. The Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell followed 30 years later. Canal systems such as the Central Arizona Project, pipelines, and other infrastructure transport Colorado River water to cities and farmland within the basin and export water outside the basin to cities such as Denver, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, Los Angeles, and San Diego, as well as California's Imperial Valley. But all this takes a toll on the river itself. Under the blazing sun and scorching dry air, more than 10% of the Colorado River's water just evaporates, seeps into the ground, or spreads out as it makes its way through the region's dams, reservoirs, and open canals. Artificial lakes and reservoirs actually evaporate more water than the natural surface runoff that existed before the dams were built. It's pretty simple. Dams usually increase the surface area of a body of water, meaning more water is exposed to air and direct sunlight. As a result, evaporation gets more intense. And the further it goes, the worse it gets. For example, in 2018, the water level in Blue Mesa Reservoir dropped below 1/3 of its capacity, exposing the foundations of a town that hadn't been seen since it was flooded to create the reservoir back in 1966. So maybe dams can be suspected of killing the river. What else could have affected the Colorado River? Surprisingly, laws that have long since become outdated. Very, very outdated. Back in 1922, the Colorado River Compact was signed, splitting the river's water among the 7 states that make up the upper and lower basins. At that time, the river's annual flow, which was used to calculate each state's share, was unusually high. But a lot's changed since then. The river's gone through massive changes along its rocky banks, including the construction of 3 major dams, a population boom, the expansion of farming, and the rise of energy production. All this has led to the Colorado River Basin being stuck in a drought for almost 2 decades now. Less rain, hotter weather. Because of this, the mountain snowpack is shrinking, and it's melting earlier and faster, which only drains the river even more. Things have gotten so bad that experts no longer call it a temporary drought for the Colorado River. Now they're calling it a permanent state of aridification, which is basically lasting dryness. Right now, the population of the Colorado River Basin is 9 times what it was in 1922, and the cities that depend on its water, like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Denver, and Phoenix, have grown even more. Just for comparison, back in 1922, only about 2,000 people called Las Vegas home. Today, the city has nearly 2 million residents. So it's no shock that demand for the Colorado River's water is higher than its supply. See for yourself. In the past 20 years, from 2000 to 2023, the Colorado River's annual flow averaged around 4 trillion gallons of water. But when the rules were set, almost 5 trillion gallons were divided up. That's when the numbers stop adding up, yet people keep relying on what was promised and using it. Partly this is because the Colorado River Compact was made by people who thought the regional climate would stay the same. But that didn't happen. In fact, the whole planet's climate is unstable, yet outdated laws can still be considered as suspects. The situation with the third suspect is a bit more complicated, and once again I'll have to refer to history to explain things. At the beginning of the 20th century, the areas around Phoenix and Tucson were much smaller and heavily dependent on groundwater. State authorities understood well that Arizona's future depended on a water supply system that included surface water, particularly from the Colorado River. Eventually, the Central Arizona Project was created, a 335-mile-long system that delivers water to Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal counties, serving over 80% of the state's population. The construction of the system began back in 1973 and was completed 20 years later, with the project costing over $4 billion. That was a huge amount of money for those times, but it was well spent because in the end, a true engineering marvel came to life. The Central Arizona Project lifts water about 3,000 feet along the entire system using 14 pump stations, a hydroelectric plant at the new WATOP Dam, the Lake Pleasant Reservoir, 39 radio gates to control water flow, and more than 50 outlets to deliver the water. In addition, a complex system of aqueducts, tunnels, underground siphons, and reservoirs was created, which together move over 449 billion gallons of water annually. The system supplies water to more than 1 million acres of land in the heart of Arizona and helped the state nearly double its population in about 30 years since its construction was completed in 1993. The project also brought over $2 trillion in economic benefits. The building process was also accompanied by incredible achievements. For instance, it took engineers 3 years to tunnel through Buckskin Mountain east of the Colorado River and create a tunnel with a 22-foot diameter lined with precast concrete segments weighing 3.5 tons each. The tunnel can move 22,400 gallons of water every second. But diverting so much water so far from the river couldn't help but affect the water level in the Colorado. The Central Arizona project takes a lot of water without offering anything in return, and as a result, the river can't reach the delta. The fourth suspect is probably the most unexpected. Wetlands cover only about 1.5% of Colorado's land area, but they hold significant ecological and economic value for the state. At the very least, they're a crucial habitat for wildlife. At some point in their life cycle, up to 90% of fish and wildlife in the state depend on habitats located along the banks of perennial rivers. Wetlands are part of this list. They also serve as stopping points and breeding grounds for migratory waterfowl, plus they help with flood control, shoreline stabilization, and water quality improvement. Naturally, wetlands wouldn't exist without the Colorado River. It literally shapes and brings them to life. But the wetlands we see today are quite different from those that once existed. According to a 1991 study, the Colorado River lost about 50% of its natural wetlands between the 1780s and the 1980s due to development. But wait, how can wetlands possibly kill a river if it's actually the one creating them and it's a natural process? Well, it's not like they mean to. Wetlands work like sponges, soaking up and slowly releasing surface water, rain, melted snow, groundwater, and floodwaters. But at the same time, these sponges hold on to water right where they are, so less of it flows downstream. It was even estimated that 1/5 of the Colorado River's water gets stuck in wetlands. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually good. But it still keeps the water from reaching the bay. I'd say the wetlands are accomplices to the crime. And now we've reached the last suspect, the fifth one. As the Colorado River flows downstream, its water gets diverted here and there. About 79% of the river's water is used for growing crops, irrigating alfalfa for livestock feed, as well as cotton fields, wheat, corn, and other produce. All that massive amount of water from the Colorado River gets spread across millions of acres of land in California's Imperial Valley. The local irrigation district holds some of the oldest water rights, nearly 1 trillion gallons. In fact, a single farming family here uses more water than the entire city of Las Vegas. Farmers argue that this keeps food on Americans' tables during the winter months, but in reality, most of this water goes into growing hay for livestock feed. And not always for American livestock. Some of it's exported, like to Saudi Arabia. Yeah, farming uses a crazy amount of water, but honestly, that's pretty normal compared to other river systems around the world. That's just how growing food works. You need a lot of water. Up to 70% of water meant for agriculture goes to just 2 crops, alfalfa and grass, for hay production. If you do the math, that means more than half the water pumped from the Colorado River is used to grow feed for beef and dairy cattle, plus some sheep and horses. Some say that if we just stop using the Colorado River water to grow hay, the country would only lose about 15% of its hay production, but the river would have enough water to refill the reservoirs. And growing cities wouldn't suffer either. There'd be plenty of water for everyone. Look, a ton of hay costs about $275. Growing that 1 ton takes 450,000 gallons of water. That's as much as 4 average homes use in a year. Producing a pound of beef takes about 1,800 gallons of water. Basically, it's a really inefficient way to use a scarce resource. Kind of like driving a semi-truck to the store just to buy a small bag of chips. Sure, you can, but why would you? That strange water consumption alone would be enough to destroy the river, but on top of that, there are some strange rules. The best-known saying about water in Colorado is use it or lose it. Basically, if you don't do something useful with your water, the state can take it away. Once you give up your water rights, they're gone, and the water returns to the river where someone else can claim it and make use of it. These water rights laws push people to use up all the river water they're allocated, even if they don't actually need it. And since the Colorado River has been providing cheap water to much of the West, wasteful irrigation methods are still alive and well. One of them is called flood irrigation, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Hundreds of acres of alfalfa get watered all at once by briefly flooding the field. As a result, hay absorbs 3 times more water than all the people in the region use for showers, lawn watering, and laundry. In general, I think agriculture, particularly growing grass, could be considered our main suspect. What do we end up with? Out of 100% of the water, 0 reaches the delta. Where does it go? A study done in 2024 using Landsat satellite data showed that the main consumers of water from the Colorado River from 2000 to 2019 were agriculture, using 52%, evaporation from natural vegetation, 19%, municipal, commercial, and industrial use, 18%, and evaporation from reservoirs, just 11%. So you could say there isn't just one river killer, they all work together. It's a combination of reasons, factors, and mistakes that led to the sad outcome. The question is whether people are doing anything to fix the situation. By the early 2000s, researchers had calculated that the Delta had lost 90% of its forests and wetlands. In an attempt to restore the environment to its natural state, the U.S. started releasing relatively small but still significant amounts of water into the Delta in 2014. At the same time, Mexican and American nonprofit groups launched restoration efforts called Raise the River. They're working with local communities to restore coastal vegetation and monitor how the Delta's ecosystems are reacting to the return of water. And guess what? This long attempt to revive the dried-up Delta seems to have worked. Researchers report that local bird and plant populations have started bouncing back after decades of decline. On the restored areas, 60% of the populations of species, including local birds like Abert's towhee and blue grosbeak, have stopped declining, or may even have started to grow. At the same time, populations of invasive bird species on the restored areas have decreased. In 2017, the U.S. and Mexico agreed to increase the amount of water released into the Delta and maintain the flow at least until 2026. But that's obviously not enough. Something needs to be done about water consumption. Good news, the United States and Mexico are ready to negotiate. Bad news, right now the states in the Colorado River Basin seem pretty far from agreeing on anything. Naturally, no one wants to cut water usage, fearing that there won't be enough left for everyday needs. In 2019, something unusual happened. After 2 decades of drought, strong storms, constant rainfall, and low temperatures caused rivers to overflow, which began refilling Colorado's reservoirs. For the first time in 19 years, the state was 100% drought-free. Unfortunately, that's not enough. Estimates say that it'll take at least 13 more extremely wet years to recover from the effects of the long-lasting drought in the West. And it doesn't seem like those 13 years are coming anytime soon. The biggest news of the past week is that I've already come up with a name for something. And yeah, only those who watch our news will be the first to find out about it. Agreement against drying up. Just recently, in May 2023, California, Arizona, and Nevada reached an agreement to cut back on water withdrawals from the struggling reservoir. It suggests that in these 3 states, water districts, Native American tribes, and farmers will reduce their total water consumption in the lower basin of the Colorado River by about 13%. On the one hand, this is great for the river. On the other hand, such restrictions could change agriculture and daily life for people in a negative way. Even experts agree with this. But it seems like the authorities are currently focused only on the river. The plan to reduce water intake will save 1 trillion gallons of this valuable resource over 3 years. Without restrictions, there were concerns that the water levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell would drop so low that the hydroelectric plants they powered would shut down. This, in turn, would jeopardize the power supply for millions of people, so the agreement was simply necessary. And yes, while some experts say that cutting down on water consumption by that much will seriously impact agriculture in 3 states, while others argue that the 1 trillion gallons is actually barely enough to save the river. It's claimed that this is the minimum to prevent the entire system from collapsing right away. It's more like a bonus for the Colorado River that'll help it last a few more years. In other words, this solution isn't long-term, so people need to figure something out later. Water shortages. I just talked about the agreement that could hurt a lot of farms and fields. It was passed in 2023, but the water shortage problem had already been a major issue in these states long before any measures were taken. For example, Arizona farmers say that water supply started running low around 20 years ago.
The drought is very serious.
The reason's the same: overuse of water and drought in the western U.S. At the end of 2021, every field on the family farm covering 254 acres was either withered or idle. And this was despite the fact that before the water problems, these same fields had been 100% productive. They grew alfalfa and cotton, but there wasn't enough water, and there was no rain either. As a result, the farmers weren't making any income and were using their savings to pay the bills. Here's another example that shows just how serious the water situation is in Arizona. In 2022, the amount of water from the Colorado River allocated to farmers in central Arizona was cut by 65%. The result's pretty obvious. About half of the irrigated farmland was left untouched, and hundreds of jobs were lost. So overall, the water crisis in Arizona is far from new. So the water cuts under the new agreement weren't a surprise. However, despite this, most farmers still continue to grow water-hungry crops using wasteful irrigation methods. What this will lead to in the end, only time will tell. But judging by how fast the Colorado River is drying up, things are only going to get worse. Tribal issues. So the Colorado River has literally run dry at the U.S.-Mexico border. The lakes have dried up and local vegetation is limited to reforestation projects. The only fish come from irrigation canals and the nearby Hardy River, a polluted 10-mile-long tributary of the Colorado, fed by agricultural runoff and a wastewater treatment plant. And that's all that's left of the river in Mexico. In the 1800s, Western colonizers recorded the presence of 5,000 to 6,000 nomadic tribes who united into clans and followed the river to fish and cultivate the fertile banks of the Colorado River Delta. What's the situation now? Official data shows that there are fewer than 400 tribes left in Mexico, while in Yuma, Arizona, there are around 1,000. I think it's easy to guess why that happened. The population decline is explained by the disappearance of the river. The 1944 bilateral agreement guaranteed Mexico 475 billion gallons of water a year, all of which was meant for agriculture. However, the deal didn't take into account the rights of indigenous people and their original connection to the river. As a result, traditional river ceremonies, medicines, fruits, grains, and local trees and shrubs used for building homes, boats, and clothing have now become rare. Tribal leaders even claim that the loss of the river has destroyed the social structure of the communities. The language is close to disappearing, spiritual ceremonies are forgotten, and young people are forced to migrate. Yes, many left the tribes because there's no river, no fish, and no life at all. What else was there to do? It's interesting that the tribes in Arizona also suffered. El Mayor is home to the largest diaspora of the Cocapa tribe, and living conditions there leave much to be desired. And again, it's due to the drought. Of course, there have been rare years with an abundance of water and life thrived. The Colorado River flowed, and Laguna Salada, a vast sandy depression west of El Mayor, would fill with fresh water and high tides from the Gulf of California, which brought an abundance of fish. However, the lagoon dried up, and the tribe had to turn to catching sea bass in the open sea. There's still a reason for hope. The measures to preserve the river, which include dredging work on the dry riverbed sections and reforestation, are helping the tidal waves from the bay to push further into the river delta. This creates small wetlands that attract hungry pelicans and herons, and for the indigenous tribe, it's literally a lifesaver. You owe me the most unobtrusive like in the world. See you later.